back now. Recognize the gentleman. Nope. From. Oh, he's a wave on. Okay. All right. Sorry. Recognize Mr. Armstrong for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we've heard testimony in numerous different committees, and one of the things I think that is pretty much any Border Patrol agent that we have heard and wherever we're at is that the cartels are in operational control of the entire northern third of Mexico. And this Congress, we have received testimony in the Oversight Committee from Border Patrol that every person who reaches the southern border essentially at this point has had to deal with the cartels at some point in time.
If the gentleman could speak up.
It has had to deal with the cartels at some point in time. You don't have any reason to disagree with that statement, do you?
Congressman, I wouldn't have the details, but the Department of Homeland Security could probably give you a better answer to that.
And, you know, this isn't a gotcha question, but this is one of the problems that we run into. And earlier you said that we do everything we can to ensure that these unaccompanied minors are not subjected to child labor even after we lose care, custody, and control. The problem is, whether it's statutory, and there's been a lot of talk about it, everything you can is not much.
That's correct.
But what you do have control over is the intake. And when when they get into your custody. And if you have 128,000, which Mr. Crenshaw was just talking about, up from 15,000, and we know that at the very least, the vast majority of those unaccompanied minors that are getting to the border have to deal with the cartels on their way to get there. And 70+% are over the age of 15. What is your intake process? I mean, this is a high-risk group of people. The cartels are not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. You have a 16-year-old boy, 16-year-old girl getting to the border. They have family wherever it is, El Salvador, Mexico, somewhere else. There is some semblance of an arrangement in which the cartels get there. And that's before we talk about sex abuse, physical abuse, all of the other horrors that exist when they get there. So if we know you lose operational control after you place them, through all the vetting, which there's been a lot of talk at. What is your intake process for these high-risk kids that do not want to tell you the truth? They are absolutely terrified of what will happen to them or their families if they actually do engage you in a real meaningful conversation.
Congressman, thank you for the question because you pointed out some of the real challenges that we face. I'm going to leave the questions about the background of the children to the Department of Homeland Security because they do that initial assessment of the child when they encounter the child. And
and that's okay, but it's actually not okay. But if that's the policy, that should change because you have them for a very specific period of time and you have them in custody. And we know, and we can talk to anybody who has been on the southern border, that the vast majority of those children that are coming to the border, and not all 17-year-olds are created equally. If you grew up in the streets of El Salvador at 17 years old, you've had a pretty hard life already. But I don't want to talk about that part of it. I want to talk about the ones that exist in this space where we have a finite amount of time to deal with whatever metrics that are going on in their life that got them to that border. And so whatever the background is before, what do you do for an intake? How do you do a sexual assault intake?
Right, and we do a pretty thorough assessment on intake as well, but what I wanted to do is distinguish between an intake that deals with security, any issues of criminal background, versus ours, which is more on the health side.
I'm more worried about I'm worried about the health and welfare of the kid you get. We'll deal with the other stuff later because that exists in a real meaningful way. Gotcha. We know there are kids that are getting tattoos once they get to Mexico or once they get to the United States and before we get there. That's a whole different issue. But I'm talking about this intake because from all of your testimony today, you have very limited abilities to deal with any of this after they leave your facilities. So what are we doing when they're there?
So the assessments that we're doing are on their status, their health status, on their situation in terms of who could care for them because we only hold them temporarily. And so our assessments, unlike a DHS's assessments, are for purposes of understanding the status, the well-being of the children. So we do intake, we do clinical assessments, we do case reviews, we do an assessment of any child. We use professionals in child welfare to understand who is coming into our door and who we're caring for. And then we continue the process during the case management to figure out if that child can be placed.
Okay, then I'm gonna ask a very specific question because I have 28 or 22 seconds left. You went up from 15,000 to 128,000. what is the difference in numbers of kids that you identify as being trafficked in some way, either for labor, sexual assault, physical assault, anything that has gone up? Because the other thing that's gone up with that number is the number of those kids who have to deal with the cartels in order to get into your facility.
Yeah. So again, Department of Homeland Security would be doing that initial check to find out if this is a child who's coming in with a trafficking background. We also, if we make an assessment and find that the child may have experienced trafficking, we also then do an assessment, and we provide actually additional services by law, by the way, that's in the statute, that we provide additional service for any child that we get into our care who we get information that they may have been trafficked in advance. And so we're able to provide them more service.
16-year-old girl who's been threatened with her parents getting killed, if they talk to you and then you have them for a finite period of time and kick them out, and for whatever reason, I mean, we know this is happening. What are the increased numbers in trafficked kids comparative to the numbers?
I don't have the specific numbers. I can try to make sure my team gets back to you with
We
any
would like to see
information we have.
those. I yield back.
Gentlemen,